Welcome to A Celtic State of Mind. I'm Paul John Dykes, and today I am absolutely delighted to be joined by Laura Bradburn, because I think the only two people at the moment from the ACSOM squad who are Scotland-based, who aren't at the game, are you and I, Laura. So we will be talking about the game because we made a commitment during the pandemic that we would cover every Celtic game, and we are sticking to that no matter what. We will be here to give you your preview, your halftime, your full-time analysis, observations, thoughts, opinions, and discussion on Celtic versus Livingston. Now, we go into this game, Laura, and we've just had a wee 5-10 minute chat before coming on. We're buzzing. We're buzzing again about Celtic, about the performances. Even though, they're not for 90 minutes the rip-roaring that we thought Ange was all about, and we saw a couple of times earlier in the season. There's been far more control over the last 5 games. But we are going into these games, and I'm not going to say that we're ever going to be complacent again, Laura. I think we've all learned lessons from last season, never become complacent. But I'm coming into this game particularly very confident. I was looking, obviously it's Halloween weekend. I don't know if you're a big Halloween fan, but I don't think there will be a nightmare on Kerrydale Street today. What's your thoughts?
Listen, it's the story of Celtic fans since before I can remember, that every time you get a wee bit of confidence, Celtic go and do something that sucks it right out of you. But I have to say, I'm feeling more confident about this Celtic team than I have done for probably a couple of years at this point. I mean, I think they're playing with an assuredness and a calmness that they haven't been doing at the start of the season. I think perhaps my sort of summation of what the players have taken from Ange's messaging has been that you keep the tempo up, and I think in the early stages they were maybe mistaking that for playing in a frantic manner, whereas I think they are calming down the way that they're playing but keeping that high tempo. You saw it in the first half an hour against Hibs during the week, that they just it reminded me of that Martin O'Neill phrase after we lost that game against Juventus back in the early 2000s. It was wave after wave of attack that they just couldn't deal with, and the minute that they got rid of the ball, it was coming straight back at them, and it seemed like it was the purest version of what we believe Ange has been trying to put across that I've seen so far.
That first 30 minutes, Laura, and again, the majority of the ACSOM squad were at Easter Road, lucky enough to get tickets. And I know that the game has been, covered by Kevin, Lawrence and Russell. But I watched that first half an hour, and I've got to say it's the best half an hour of football that I've seen under Ange Postecoglou. So it's probably the best half an hour of football I've seen at Celtic or by Celtic for 18 months, because it was better than anything I've seen last season. And I was looking at that thinking to myself, when we scored the third goal, Hugo misses a chance just a few minutes after that to make it 4. And it could have been anything at that stage. If you go, and I know that a lot of these high-scoring games, I remember going 5-0 up against Rangers after 50 minutes, Laura. I know that it doesn't mean you're going to score a goal every 10 minutes. But it was looking as though we really were going to put Hibs to the sword. Now, wee bit of credit to Hibs as well. They came out fighting again. They regrouped, because I just think we had them on the ropes and they were ragged by that stage. And they came back at us. And it was at that stage that I felt that the Celtic side showed a completely different side to it. And it was all about control. Now, the orchestrator of that is Callum McGregor. And I had this discussion, Laura, on Thursday. And I know that we were talking again before we came on air there that if you're kind of like at the end of the week in terms of the bulletins, sometimes by the time you start discussing things, it's almost like old news. So I come in on a Thursday and I'm talking to JP. You come in and speak to Jim and Tony on a Friday. But I was talking about the game where it was pretty fresh in my mind. And I was actually talking about the importance of guys like Callum McGregor, Kyogo, Joe Hart, and Cameron Carter-Vickers. I'm now putting in that category. That's the spine of our team now. And my biggest concern at this moment in time isn't a loss of form. It actually isn't, because if Kyogo's not firing on all cylinders, you'll bring on Giacomakis and we'll see him today. He starts, we'll have a look at the team. The only other part of that team I think that you couldn't replace if there was a loss of form would probably be the goalie, Joe Hart.
Yeah.
My biggest concern is the rash challenges that are going in. Now, I've got to say, I'm talking about Celtic here because I watch every single second of every performance involving Celtic. If it's the same outside in my Celtic bubble in Scottish football, then that's fine. If these tackles are commonplace and people are getting away with high tackles like that, then I'll be proven wrong. Great, but the Porteous tackle on McGregor, it's one. There's a whole plethora of them just this season. I listed 7 or 8 of them the other day, Laura, and that's my biggest concern because is our clubs targeting certain players? Are players targeting certain players? It seems interesting that McGregor's been on the end of 2 of these, one by Halliday at Tynecastle and then one at Easter Road by Porteous, and it's unacceptable. I mean, what do we do as a club in a scenario like that? Because it's about protecting the players. I'm not going to go into the conversation about refereeing, which I think our standard of refereeing is poor at the very, very best in Scottish football. I'm not going to get into the conversation about the fact that there are certain referees that you certainly wouldn't want to referee a Celtic game or a Rangers game for obvious reasons. What I'm talking about is protecting our players at this moment in time, Laura. That's a big concern I've got, particularly when we've just kind of, clicked into place and we've got this momentum building.
Yeah, I mean, it's always a concern, in a way, when you're watching a football match or when you're playing in a football match, there's an accepted inherent risk in playing the match that you go, well, if something unfortunate happens, it can't be helped. There's always a risk of injury, but it does get especially frustrating when you see dangerous challenges going unpunished or punished less than they should be. And it was funny, actually, because I was listening to... I paid for the Hibs pay-per-view on Wednesday night, given the lack of options that were available for watching the match. And that tackle on McGregor, the Hibs commentator, and I know, as is the case with club commentators, they are a bit biased towards their own team, but he was saying that actually Ryan Porteous get booked because his reputation goes ahead of him because he's notoriously quite a rash tackler. But I actually was thinking along the same lines as you. I almost thought McGregor's reputation is preceding him, that he seems to be on the end of these. And I think the main reason is it does seem like it's almost a tactical thing that teams are doing, where they can see how vital McGregor is to the way that we play. They can see how we can struggle to adapt without him, especially in a case where we might lose him suddenly during a match. And so you can't help but wonder whether these types of challenges that are repeatedly being done on certain players is a direct instruction. I would really like to think not, because I would like to think in an ideal world that managers and coaches aren't telling players to go out and deliberately hurt other players. But like I say, when the evidence starts to mount up, you have to wonder. As for the refereeing of these situations, I'm the same as you. The discussion about, the reasons for referees making these decisions and things is maybe one for another day, but I think it's just reflective of, at the very least, a very poor level of refereeing. And I, to be honest, wouldn't be against, looking at in the future bringing in a higher standard of referee from other countries and from higher trained countries, even if it's just for a few seasons, to help increase the standard of refereeing in this country, because it can't really continue the way it is. You've seen other teams calling out poor decisions this week for obvious reasons, and it seems to be something that paranoid Celtic and Rangers fans used to moan about all the time, but actually you're seeing other clubs increasingly vocalise their frustration with the poor refereeing, and it's something that I think has become more obvious by the day.
We've heard it from Hearts and Aberdeen this season, among others. And when we're going to run through the team, good afternoon, everybody, by the way, for joining us on A Celtic State of Mind. And you're tuning in on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitch and Twitter from all over the globe. And I think that's why it's important that we continue with the match day bulletins, because it's not everybody who can get to the games and they want to maybe tap into a conversation from people with a Celtic state of mind. Now, before I get into the comments and we go through the team, I was pulled up last night on Twitter because I made a few comments about Josip Juranovic because he got a poke in the eye. And at that time, I thought that he made a meal of it. I apologise to Juranovic. I don't think he listens to a Celtic state of mind, but I was pulled up for it last night. Apparently, he had to go and get himself checked out at hospital. Obviously, my priority isn't about being proven right or wrong. I'm just glad that the player's okay, Laura. He was able to finish the game. He's starting today. And that defence now almost picks itself. It's Joe Hart, Tony Ralston, Cameron Carter-Vickers, Carl Starfelt, Josip Juranovic. We have Callum McGregor, Beaton coming in to replace Rogic, with Turnbull, I guess, playing in the number 10, maybe the number 8 with McGregor in the 10, Beaton playing in the number 6. Giakoumakis comes in for Kyogo, and we've got Abada coming in for Mikey Johnson, but I would guess that Yotta's going to go out to his favoured left-hand side with Abada out right. What do you think of the lineup and the changes that have been made?
I think it might, Tom Rogic has been a great player for us over the past few weeks, and for all the criticism that him and Turnbull had of not being able to work together, they seem to have found a rhythm. So that in a way is disappointing, but it might inadvertently allow us to adopt a more natural shape for the players that we've got available. I can see McGregor maybe sitting a bit deeper to support Beaton, and Turnbull having more space in a kind of number 10 role with Abada and Jota out wide. So I think it's an interesting pick. Looking at the defence, like you said, it's encouraging to see. We were talking about this on the bulletin yesterday. It's encouraging that while we have options, we've got a consistent defence who seem to be playing well, who are building the clean sheets and developing a real working relationship. And kudos especially to the man in the photo from the tweeted team from Celtic, Anthony Ralston. He's really made that right back position his own, and all credit to him for it. I actually think that it's amazing to be sitting here and have a team where we've got as strong a team on the park, and we've also got a few options on the bench if the game doesn't happen to be going our way, that we can actually bring on game changers. Because one of the biggest problems we've had over the last few years has not necessarily always been the starting 11, but the fact that if it isn't working, we've got no way to change it.
No, you're right. And this season was so frustrating, particularly the early part of the season where, I think actually Ange Postecoglou might have wanted to make a substitution a couple of times, Laura, particularly in Europe, and he's looked at that bench and there just wasn't the option available for him to do it. I mean, he was looking on the bench, and we had at that time players like Urhoghide and also Liam Shaw, who have never played a competitive game of football for Celtic, and we're playing in Europe, and they were two of the options on the bench. Let's just remind you of who is on the bench. We've got Scott Bain, very much the backup at this moment in time, with Kyogo, game changer. James McCarthy returns to the squad. He's on the bench. Mikey Johnson drops back to the bench. We've got Jamesy Forrest returning on the bench as well. Montgomery and Welsh. Welsh has almost become the forgotten man. I feel a bit sorry for him. But when that defence, like you say, picks itself now, it's clicked into place, Laura, then there's absolutely nothing you can do when you're Stephen Welsh. I don't think he played particularly bad, I just think it's a circumstance where we knew we had to strengthen. And when you're looking at Carter-Vickers and also that relationship he's starting to build up with Starfelt at the back, you couldn't have it any other way. But I'll tell you something, if we need to make a couple of changes and you're looking at Monty and Stephen Welsh, I'm pretty confident as backups at this stage.
Yeah, I was just about to say that. We talk about changes being made and options that we need, and very often when you're talking about that, you're talking about players going forward because you're struggling to score a goal. But actually, we have options there in Welsh and Montgomery, Montgomery especially seems to be a bit of a utility man who can play left back, who can play basically anywhere up the left-hand side. And Welsh, fingers crossed it doesn't happen, but if anything unfortunate was to happen to either Starfelt or Cameron Carter-Vickers, Welsh coming off the bench doesn't immediately make me break out into a cold sweat the way it would have been if it had been, for example, near Beaton coming on to play at centre-back. And I think that's another thing I wanted to come on and say is, Beaton, still not my favourite by any stretch of the imagination, but I'd much rather see him playing in the midfield as he's going to be today than at centre-back. And it's just another indication of the options that we have available and the strength that we seem to be developing in the squad, that Beaton isn't required at centre-back anymore and can actually be played in what many people believe to be his more natural position. And this is all before you even talk about some of the players we've got to come back from injury, like like Julian, who, you know, is taking his time to come back. But when he does come back, he's now at a point where he's not going to be an automatic first start, even when he is match fit.
This is the thing. We were talking for so long, Laura, about the kind of long-term casualties that we were almost talking as though as soon as they come back, they're going to be the exact same player as they were before, and they'll just fit right back into the groove of the team. But there's two elements to that. The first one is it might take them a while to get back to the standards. Right, you've got match fitness, that's one thing. But your performance as well, the sharpness, getting right back up to the standard of the player. But also, like you said there is no guarantee he's going to step in. Now, I've been very impressed with Carter Vickers and Starfelt, the fact that they've been able to create a partnership at the back. I know that we've got a very impressive defensive record domestically. You know, the thing is, I'm not being overcritical here. I just don't like the ball on Starfelt's left foot. That is at that point that, you know, I do have a few concerns, but I'm not going to be overcritical because I think as a partnership they've done really, really well. Carter Vickers, it's strange because he looks slow. It's a strange one. He looks slow, but he doesn't ever seem to get absolutely burnt for pace. So he obviously does have pace, but it's just, you know, maybe it's anticipation. He always seems to be able to get, you know, his body in front of the man. And some of the tackles that I've seen on Hibs, against Hibs rather, the other night, and also his attacking play, he's quite happy to go for a run with the ball. I'm having a look at near Beaton because, you know, we joked for quite a few weeks before the Midtjylland game that we're going to start it with Beaton at centre-half in a European qualifier once again. It came, you know, to transpire that was the case. And he kind of blew it. He didn't kind of blow it. He completely blew it in that game by getting sent off. And a man of his experience should know better. But I think there's two performances by Nir Beaton that I'm going to point out. The first one is he's been forced to come in against Hibs the other night. And I felt that there was nothing that was like earth-shattering about his display, Laura, but he played very well. He was solid in his performance. Another one would be Aberdeen at Pittodrie, which I think was a turning point. I was talking about this yesterday. I think that was a turning point in our season. And I think back to the game because I actually felt that Aberdeen were the better side in the second half. I felt that we showed a lot of character in winning that game. And of course, at the end of the game, with it, you know, the players and Ange Postecoglou going up to the fans and sharing in the celebrations, it felt like a turning point, and it's proven to be a turning point because we've gone on a winning streak since then. And I think Beaton was a big part of that victory as well, Laura.
Yeah, there's a funny thing with some players where the less you notice them, the better a game you can say they've had. And Beaton falls into that category because, unfortunately, you know, he's not a game changer of a player. He's not a number 10 or a winger or a striker or something like that who's going to do something really memorable to win a match for you. But he can certainly do something very memorable to lose a match for you. And that's been his problem a lot of the time, is that he's stuck out for the wrong reasons. So when he does have a game where, as you say, he's solid, it's very often because he doesn't do anything wrong and nobody's looking for him to do anything spectacular. There are plenty of other match winners in that team, in that squad for us now. He's not required to do that for us. So if he just comes in and does his job to the extent and the standard that we know he can do it, then that's all you can ask of him, really. And it's the same with Starfelt, who I feel a bit sorry for, because I've said this before, you know, I got a bit of a reputation for him being a bit of a whipping boy for me. Not completely, I don't think I was completely unjust in the early criticisms I had of him, but he certainly has settled down and has managed his gameplay a lot better. Again, the unfortunate thing with him is that the mistakes that he does make stick out, but that's just an unfortunate side effect of playing as a centre half, that you can do 90% of the game right. If you do even one or two things wrong in a game, that can be the things that lead directly to goals. And so that's the unfortunate part of his game that he has to deal with. But you know, that's just the job of a centre half. But yeah, Beaton and Starfelt are two players who, despite their bad starts to the season, or their less than brilliant starts to the season, have really almost been a sort of epitome in player form of the way the entire team has performed. They have slotted into their roles a bit better. They're playing a lot calmer. and they seem to understand what they're being asked to do, which I can understand for players must be difficult if you've got a manager like Ange who is coming in and asking you to play in a completely different way to the way you might have played at other clubs.
You know, when I'm looking at this as well, Laura, it was interesting. I was chatting to JP on Thursday, and there was so much change at Celtic during that period of upheaval, looking for a manager, bringing in Ange, and the amount of players that left and those coming in, all within a short space of time before the first fixture. And there's a few obvious ones you look at in terms of the experience, and you look at, James Forrest, you look at Callum McGregor, but we were having a wee chat just on Thursday there in relation to the experience of Nir Beaton and Tommy Rogic. They both have a wealth of European and international experience. They've both been at the club for 8 years. Next year, they will both have been at the club for 9 years, which, going on to a decade, it's testimonial territory, which is bizarre when you think about it, because I don't automatically think of them in that kind of category, Laura, of a player who's been there for almost a decade. But the importance of that experience, the calm heads, and the fact that they know the club, the culture of the club, the expectations of the club and our fans is very, very important. I know that Beaton's not played a massive part under Ange Postecoglou. Perhaps unsurprisingly, Tommy Rogic has. He looked like he was on fire against Hibs at Easter Road. The wizardry was there. I don't know if he could have kept up for 90 minutes, but certainly for the 44 minutes he was on the park, he was the best player on the pitch. How much are we going to miss him? I know that we do have the creativity there in Turnbull, and probably to a lesser degree in McGregor as well. But Rogic will be a big miss.
Oh yeah, 100%. I think he's got. His negative side is that he can let games pass him by at times, but in terms of game changers, you'd struggle to find very many players at the club who are above him in that list. Perhaps Jota, perhaps Kyogo, but apart from that, he's probably second or third in that list. And he seems to have been a real instrument for Ange to implement his philosophy. Ange has worked with him before. He'll no doubt have used Rogic on the pitch to relay messages, and it certainly seems to be that way. A lot of the work pivoted around him, so it will be a big miss, but I'm hoping that what we see today is an ability for us to adapt to losing a player of that quality and carry on, because as we all know all too well, these injuries happen in a season, and victories and leagues and things like that are won by being able to adapt and make sure that you use the full capacity of your squad to bring players in, take them out, rest them, replace them when they're injured, and not slip up during that time.
One player I failed to mention actually when we were talking about defence, and I've seen it coming up on the comments during the week on the bulletin, is Liam Scales. He seems to have dropped out of favour at this moment in time. I don't think it's a major concern, because when he came in, I certainly expected him to be, bedded into the team. And I'm not, down crying or looking down my nose at the standard of football he was playing. I just think that, there might have been that adaptation. He's got to come into Scottish football, get up to pace with the game, get to know his teammates, etc. But I didn't expect him to drop completely out of the squad, and that's what's happened today. What I would like to point out, though, is that Welsh, you've got Montgomery there, you've got the cover at left back, you've got Welsh, who he has been deployed as a right back and a right-sided centre half. So I guess you're kind of hoping that Starfelt doesn't get any kind of niggling injury today. When we look at the wingers, though, look at the situation we're now in, Laura. One minute we couldn't buy a winger. Next minute we've got Abada and Jota, who on their game, as you say, are right up there in terms of the creativity stakes. And you look to the bench and we've got not only Johnston and Forrest, but Kyogo, who can play wide, left or right as well. That gives us an absolute wealth of options, spearheaded today anyway by Giakoumakis through the middle. And there is some positivity coming through. First up is Scott Howe, who reckons he's going to get a double today. I've been impressed with, what I've seen so far of Giakoumakis, and I think it's brilliant squad management by Ange Postecoglou to rest a couple of the potentially star players today.
Yeah, I mean, Kyogo especially, what we shouldn't fail to remember is, he's been flying halfway across the world, or sometimes more than halfway across the world, playing for Japan. So, that's bound to catch up with him at some point. He came back in pretty quickly after what we were led to believe would be an injury that would keep him out for longer than it did. So, using him and not abusing him by playing him too much is certainly something that I'm glad to see. The point about the wingers is, it's just amazing to have all these options, and that's without even mentioning Karamoko Dembele, who's injured and still to come back. And the other good thing about all these players is they all seem to be able to play right hand side, left hand side. They can switch over, which must be a nightmare for players to play against, because if you go out and say, right, you're picking up Jota today, or you're picking up Amada today, and then all of a sudden they switch over and you've got a different prospect to deal with, it can be a real problem, especially for players who aren't of their quality. But just to touch on the Liam Scales thing, it's a strange one for me, because he came in, I think it was the last 20 minutes of the League Cup game against Wraith Rovers, and looked very, very accomplished. Now, I know looking very accomplished against Wraith Rovers isn't really an indication of how you're going to do it at a higher level, but he did everything right. He looked very composed on the ball, when at that time we were still playing a very frantic brand of football that he seemed to come in and calm down. The only concern I have, and this is for him as an individual, is I find it very hard to believe to this day that Ange Postecoglou has come in and gone, I want that defender from Shamrock Rovers. And by that, what I mean is, I'm not sure Liam Scales was his signing. And so it's perhaps a case of, don't get me wrong, I don't think Ange would have kept him out if he didn't have any other options. But as we've already spoke about on the show this morning, or this afternoon, the defence is picking itself now, and there are options there. So if he doesn't need to use Scales, and he wasn't particularly the man that brought him in, then I can understand why he's gone with other options. That's not to be a reflection on Scales' level as a player, I don't think. But what he needs to do is obviously just keep his head down, keep working hard, and give himself that opportunity, because you only need to look at Anthony Ralston to see somebody who's done that for himself.
The big thing, Laura, I think it's a fair comment. I remember the last time we discussed this, and quite a lot of comments came in saying, well, you're speculating. You don't know who signed the player. Yeah, that's right. But, there is an element of having an educated guess at it. I mean, we know that it happens. Gordon Strachan spoke about it with Paddy McCourt. Paddy McCourt speaks about it. Gordon Strachan had nothing to do with the acquisition of Paddy McCourt. It was Dermot Desmond. And that was, that came from Paddy and Gordon Strachan. So it does happen. And if the player turns out to be a success, then everybody's happy. As a manager, you're going to be presented with screeds and screeds of potential buys and loanees that you, as a manager, have never ever identified. Your scouting team, once it becomes the scouting team, are trusted to identify players, and then everything is weighed up. I mean, I remember Strachan came in when this was a bone of contention among a lot of Celtic fans, and he basically said that, well, obviously the manager doesn't identify every player. There will be occasions, and I think one of the examples that springs to my mind is Gary Hooper was identified by Neil Lennon, and Neil Lennon's agent at that time, Jim Melrose, was the guy that scouted him. He was going and watching him at Scunthorpe. He knew a lot about this player. So from time to time, of course, that does happen. But the other side of that is that there are players recruited by the club, and not directly by the manager. Does he fancy him? I don't know. I want to see more of Scales. I know how highly rated he is in Ireland. There's talking of which, McCarthy, James McCarthy, who's represented Ireland many times, Capello Mark comes in to say he wants to see him at some time. Now, I think it would be great today, at some stage, to be able to introduce McCarthy and Forrest into the team, because, again, we know what both players can do. Laura, we're quite happy with the starting 11, but then you start adding in a James Forrest to the mix, Chris Jullien, James McCarthy, and if we can get and keep these players fit, then we go into the second half of the season in far more confident mood.
I think we will go in with a far more confident mood. McCarthy, falls into the same bracket as Liam Scales, I think, in terms of might not have been an Ange signing, but if he can provide us with something worthwhile and positive in terms of a contribution, and more so than he has done in his first few months at the club, then you can't really complain. That's all you want. We need options in midfield to be able to rotate people and to be able to give ourselves options to rest players the way we are doing in other positions, and McCarthy has to be able to step in for that, and I'm the same as you. I hope to see that today.
Now, we know there are loads of other things happening at the moment off the football park, Laura. We are not ignoring them. We will concentrate on the game until the game is over before we start speaking about them. But do expect a 30-minute silence that has been generated by a number of groups who are going under the Celtic shared banner in relation to the club's decision to appoint, they're set to appoint Bernard Higgins in a senior position at the club. And anyone who has followed the Offensive Behaviour at the Football Act knows that he was pivotal in implementing that, not only implementing it, but in such a way that fans felt victimised. And 30 minutes of silence will be a protest at the beginning of the game. We're not going to be silent for 30 minutes, Laura, because we're going to watch the match, and we will be back at half-time. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in, and hopefully we are talking about Celtic being ahead against Livingston. Join us at half-time on A Celtic State of Mind.